You won't believe what happened the night my husband's friend showed up at our cabin, completely unannounced. What started as a quiet weekend alone turned into something that left me questioning everything I thought I knew and feeling more alive than I had in years. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from: New York, Dallas, Phoenix, maybe a small town no one's ever heard of. Let's connect before we dive into this wild story. Okay, let me take you back to the beginning. The weekend was supposed to be mine. Just me, the silence of the woods, and the crackling fireplace at our old family cabin. My husband, Steve, had planned to join me, but last minute he had to fly out for work. He insisted I still go. "You need the break, Hannah," he said, touching my shoulder gently, like he always does when he wants me to do something for myself. So I packed up Friday morning and made the 3-hour drive upstate. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours. Wooden walls that smelled of pine and old smoke, mismatched furniture that had been there since the early 90s, and a fireplace that only lit properly if you sweet-talked it with just the right mix of kindling and luck. I loved the quiet. No buzzing phones, no appointments, just me, a warm sweater, and a good book. By late evening, the sky had darkened into a deep indigo. A soft snow began falling, frosting the trees in delicate white. I had just poured myself a glass of red wine and settled on the worn-out leather couch when I heard the crunch of tires outside. I froze. No one was supposed to be here. The headlights of a car cut through the window. I stood up, wine-glass still in hand, my heart doing a confused little stutter. A few seconds later, there was a knock at the door. "Who?" I whispered to myself, inching toward the door, uncertain whether to be nervous or annoyed. I cracked it open cautiously, and there he was. "Hey, Hannah," said Jack. Jack, my husband's oldest friend, college roommate, golf buddy, and to be honest, someone I never really figured out. He was quiet, observant, the type who always seemed like he was thinking something but rarely said it. He looked cold and surprised to see me. "Steve said he wouldn't make it, but he told me you'd be here," he added quickly, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just figured I'd use the spare room. Been a hell of a week." I opened the door wider, still processing. No, it's fine," I said, trying to sound more welcoming than confused. "Come in. I just wasn't expecting anyone." He stepped in, shaking snow off his boots and unzipping his coat. Underneath, he wore a charcoal sweater and dark jeans. I noticed he looked tired, not the usual rugged, tired Jack carried around, but something heavier, something quiet in his eyes. He put down a small bag and looked around the living room, nostalgia softening his features. "Place hasn't changed much." "Nope. Still has the same ugly couch and that stubborn fireplace." Jack gave a short laugh and nodded toward the fire. "Mind if I help with it?" "Be my guest," I said, handing him the iron poker. We settled into an easy silence, the kind that didn't feel uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. It had been years since I'd spent time with Jack without Steve around. Over the years, I'd watched them laugh together, share their guy jokes, rib each other about everything. I was always the one making the sandwiches or refilling drinks, never really part of their world. Jack and I never talked much beyond pleasantries. But that night, that cold, firelit night, something shifted. After the fire had caught and the room grew warmer, we both sat on the floor in front of it, backs leaning against the couch. I offered him a glass of wine, and he didn't refuse. We talked. Not just about the weather or the road up, or Steve's ridiculous travel schedule. We talked about life, about work, about how both of us were feeling. Off, tired, drained. I told him how the past year had felt like I'd been holding my breath, waiting for something to change, to snap, to wake me up. He didn't laugh. He nodded, slowly, like he knew exactly what I meant. I feel like I've been living in autopilot, I admitted. It's like I'm checking off boxes, but not really in it anymore. He turned to look at me then, his eyes darker in the firelight. Yeah, he said quietly. Same. There was something in the way he looked at me. Not lust, not longing, just recognition. Like he saw the wear in me, the ache for something deeper, and mirrored it. The silence between us thickened, but not in a bad way. The kind of silence where something unsaid hangs in the air, breathing between you. "I almost didn't come," he said after a long moment. "Didn't want to intrude on your weekend." "I'm glad you did," I heard myself say. The truth is, I meant it. Jack didn't feel like a stranger. Not anymore. He felt like someone I had somehow known all along, but had never truly seen. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the fire crackled, warm and slow. And something about the way he looked at me just then, steady, open, unafraid, made the air feel charged in a way I hadn't felt in a long, long time. We didn't touch, not yet, but something had started. Something quiet and unexpected, something neither of us could deny. The fire had burned low by the time we moved from the floor to the couch, bringing our wine glasses with us. It wasn't planned, just a quiet shuffle as the warmth from the fireplace started to fade and the cushions seemed more inviting. Jack sat on one end, I on the other. Still plenty of space between us, still nothing inappropriate. But something in the air felt undeniably different. I wrapped the blanket around my legs and tucked my feet under me. Jack swirled his wine and stared into the fire like he was reading something in the flames. "You and Steve," he said slowly, "you ever feel stuck?" I turned to look at him, unsure where that question came from, but not offended by it. Maybe because I'd asked myself the same thing so many times in the past year. "We're comfortable," I answered honestly. "We know each other so well. He's a good man." Jack nodded, but didn't smile. Comfortable can feel like sleepwalking sometimes. That hit harder than I expected. I sipped my wine, then set the glass on the coffee table. It's not that we don't care about each other. I just think somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other as people. We became roles. He's my husband. I'm his wife. We stopped asking questions. Jack turned to me, his gaze heavier now. "What would you want someone to ask you?" That question landed in my chest like a stone. I couldn't answer right away. No one had asked me something like that in years. Not Steve, not friends, not even me, to myself. I searched for words. I guess I'd want someone to ask what I dream about, what I miss, what scares me. Not just how my day was or what's for dinner. Jack didn't interrupt. He just nodded again, as if every word made perfect sense. "I think we all want to be seen," he said quietly. And in that moment, I felt seen. Fully. Not as someone's wife, not as a hostess or a friend of a friend, but as a woman with desires and questions and unfinished thoughts. Jack's attention didn't feel predatory or pushy. It felt intimate, present, like he was truly listening. He refilled both our glasses, and we clinked them together lightly. "To being seen," he said, to not hiding any more," I replied. We talked for hours after that, about the paths we didn't take, the relationships that shaped us, the people who disappointed us. He told me about his divorce, something Steve never really mentioned. I learned that Jack had tried counseling, that he once planned to move to Montana, that he still kept a notebook of poems he wrote but never shared. I leaned my head back against the couch and smiled. "You always seemed so quiet. I had no idea you had so much in you." Jack looked at me with that same steady expression. Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to ask. There it was again, that gentle pull between us. Not physical, not overt. Emotional, soulful. It was after midnight when I finally stood up. I should get to bed. Jack stood too. Yeah, long day. We stood there, just a couple feet apart. The fire had died to glowing embers. The air was still warm, but I felt a flush rise of my neck that had nothing to do with the wine. "Good night, Jack," I said softly. He looked down at me for a beat too long. "Good night, Hannah." I turned to go, but just before I reached the hallway, he said something, low but clear. "I'm glad I came." I stopped, turning slightly. Me too. That night, as I lay in bed under a thick wool blanket, I couldn't stop replaying our conversation. His voice, his eyes, the way he looked at me like I was worth understanding. I felt something awaken inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Not lust, longing. Not for Jack specifically, but for connection. Real, honest connection. I didn't know what the next day would bring. But I knew that whatever wall I'd built up around myself had cracked, just a little. And through that crack, warmth was starting to seep in. I fell asleep with a strange, full ache in my chest, the kind that comes not from sadness, but from being deeply moved. Something had changed between us, and I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but I knew it mattered. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, casting golden lines across the wooden floorboards. I woke slowly, my body warm under the thick blanket, my mind still tangled in the memory of the night before. Jack's voice, our laughter, the quiet intensity in his eyes, it all lingered like smoke. I got up, wrapped myself in my robe, and padded into the kitchen to make coffee. The scent of freshly ground beans and the familiar hum of the old drip machine brought a small sense of comfort. But I still felt a twinge in my chest, that same gentle ache from the night before. Jack was already outside. I saw him through the frosted kitchen window, standing near the tree line in his coat, hands in his pockets, looking out over the snowy woods. He looked so still, almost like a figure carved out of the landscape. I didn't want to disturb the moment, but I also couldn't ignore the strange urge to be near him. By the time I stepped outside with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, he turned as if he'd felt me coming. "Morning," he said with a slight smile. "Cold morning," I replied, handing him a cup. "You're braver than me." He shrugged. I needed to clear my head. We stood in silence for a while, sipping coffee, watching the white breath curl out of our mouths and vanish into the crisp air. "I kept thinking about what you said last night," he said finally. "About being seen. About feeling like we're just playing roles." I nodded, unsure what to say. My heart beat a little faster. "You made me think about how many years I've spent just existing," he continued, "doing what's expected, being the strong one, the quiet one, the dependable guy who never asks for anything." There was no pity in his voice, just honesty. I looked down at the snow. I know that feeling. I think a lot of women do. We give, and somewhere along the way we forget what we even needed in the first place. He turned toward me then, his voice low and certain. "What do you need now, Hannah?" The question hit me like a gust of wind. No one had ever asked me that. Not like that. Not with that kind of weight. I looked at him, my breath catching a little. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just know I don't want to feel numb anymore." Jack took a slow step closer. Not intrusive, just intentional. "You're not numb now," he said. And he was right. I wasn't. I felt raw, awake, every nerve tingling in the quiet between us. He didn't reach out to touch me. He didn't have to. Everything was in his eyes. "I'm not trying to cross a line," he said gently. "I just needed you to know that you're not alone in this." I nodded slowly, heart pounding in my chest. "I know." We didn't go back inside right away. Instead, we took a long walk along the snow-covered trail behind the cabin. We didn't speak much, but every step felt loaded with unspoken truths. Every brush of our arms, every shared glance, it all said what neither of us could yet. Later that afternoon, the snow picked up again. A soft, steady curtain of white that muted the world. We stayed indoors, made soup, played old records. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Jack had a dry sense of humor I'd never noticed before. He teased me about my taste in music. I teased him about his old flannel shirts. It was easy, natural. When evening came, the fire was lit again, casting flickers of gold across the room. I sat on the floor with a blanket, leaning against the couch, and Jack joined me again, just like the night before. But this time, the space between us was smaller. There was a moment, quiet and long, when our hands rested near each other. Neither of us moved. We just sat, the fire crackling softly, the snow still falling outside. And then, slowly, his fingers touched mine. Just barely. A brush, a pause, a silent question. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my hand, lacing my fingers with his. It was such a simple thing, two hands finding each other in the quiet, but it felt like an earthquake inside me. He didn't speak, neither did I, but we both knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a betrayal. It was something real. It was two people, lost in their own lives, finding a spark where they least expected it. And in that moment, by the fire, hand in hand, I felt more alive than I had in years. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Not yet. What we shared was deeper than that. A slow, emotional current building between us, too powerful to ignore. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't even know what I wanted to happen. But I knew that something inside me had shifted. And whatever came next, I wasn't going to pretend it didn't matter. That night, I barely slept. Not because of guilt or confusion, but because of how alert I felt. Every part of me was awake. My skin, my thoughts, my emotions. I lay in bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling beams of the cabin, replaying every word, every glance, every breath from the day. Jack's hand in mine. The way he looked at me like he actually saw me. Not for who I was supposed to be, Steve's wife, the hostess, the dependable woman, but for who I truly was. A woman with desires, with stories, with quiet needs that had gone ignored for far too long. Around 2 a.m., I heard the soft creak of floorboards outside my door. For a second, I thought maybe he was coming to me. But he didn't knock. The sound passed, and part of me was grateful for the restraint, his and mine. The next morning, the storm had eased. The world was silent, coated in soft snow. The sun rose slow and golden, casting a warm glow through the frosted windows. I found Jack in the kitchen, making coffee. He smiled when he saw me, and I smiled back. It wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt deeper, like we had crossed into a quiet understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Sleep okay?" he asked, handing me a mug. "Not really," I admitted. "Too many thoughts." He nodded. "Same here." We stood there a moment, sipping in silence. It wasn't the same as before. There was a stillness in the air, but also a weight, a sense that we both knew this couldn't stay in this perfect little snow globe forever. I sat down at the kitchen table, and he joined me. "I don't want to hurt Steve," I said, finally breaking the silence. Jack looked at me carefully. "Neither do I." There it was, the truth hanging between us. Whatever this was, whatever had awakened between us, it lived in a complicated place. It wasn't betrayal, but it was something more than friendship, something delicate, something real. "I think what happened here," I continued, "needed to happen. Maybe not between you and me specifically, but for me. I needed to feel seen, to feel like a woman again, like a person who matters." Jack reached across the table and took my hand again. "You do matter, Hannah. You've always mattered." That brought tears to my eyes. Not dramatic ones, just a quiet sting, a relief that someone had finally said it out loud. "I don't know what this means going forward," I said. He nodded. "Me either. And I'm not asking for anything. I'm grateful for this moment. For you." We packed our things slowly that morning, neither of us rushing to leave. The roads would be clear enough soon, but neither of us mentioned time. There was no timeline for saying goodbye to something that had shifted the way you see yourself. Before he walked out to his car, Jack turned to me one last time at the door. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," I replied. "And Jack." He paused, waiting. "I hope you find someone who sees you too." He smiled softly. "Maybe I already did." And with that, he left. I watched his car disappear into the white trees until the silence of the woods wrapped around me again. Later that evening, I sat by the fireplace alone, a new log crackling, the same wine glass in my hand. But I wasn't the same woman who had held it 2 nights before. I wasn't waiting for something anymore. Something had changed. It didn't lead to an affair. It didn't wreck my marriage. But it opened a door inside me that had long been sealed shut. A door to feeling again, to asking for more, to listening to the quiet voice inside me that had gone ignored for far too long. When Steve got back 2 days later, I didn't tell him everything. But I did start talking in ways I hadn't in years. I told him what I missed, what I needed. I asked him what he dreamed about, what he feared. And slowly, not all at once, something began to shift between us two. Maybe it took someone outside the marriage to remind me what I was worth inside it. Maybe Jack wasn't meant to be part of my future, just the one who woke me up to it. But I'll never forget that weekend, because it wasn't just the fire we shared. It was something much deeper, and it left a warmth that hasn't left me since.